Hello again. It's Reproduction Part 4. This is our last video on Chapter 46. This is a really long chapter. It has so much interesting stuff in it. So I did want to take the time in this chapter to really kind of go through the male and female reproductive systems. They're just too cool. So let's get to the last component. This will be a shorter video, I think. Oops. Let me find what I'm looking for. So we're on part 4. We've talked about the female reproductive structures. We've talked about the reproductive functioning with the hormonal control if there is no pregnancy. But what happens if there is a pregnancy? What other hormones are involved in regulating the pregnancy, the birth, the lactation that goes on and on and on in the female system, in female mammals, right? So that's what we're going to talk about in this section. And like I said, this should be pretty short. So pregnancy, birth, lactation, what's happening? So here we've got a picture of the ovary. All right. And ovulation happens. So a secondary oocyte is released from the ovary, picked up by the oviducts, and it's traveling slowly down the oviducts when sperm arrive, and it looks like in this picture there's a lot of sperm around that egg. One of them fertilizes the egg, and the egg is now called the fertilized egg is called a zygote, right? And that zygote starts to go through mitosis, cell division, rapid cell division, and so it's starting to develop, and now we've got a little ball of cells that's moving pretty quickly through the oviduct and into the uterus. In the uterus, it arrives here at about 5 or 7 days after fertilization. It implants itself in the uterine lining or in the endometrium. And that implantation process, like I said, it takes about a week for the growing embryo to arrive in the uterus. Now what happens? How does what we need to do at this point is we need to maintain the endometrium so that the embryo can survive and can thrive and grow. How does that happen? What hormones are involved in that process? So I drew this up. It's kind of a flow chart. Again, we'll take a look at the flow chart as we can. So an egg is fertilized. That's happening in the oviduct. Right? And then that fertilized egg starts to develop. It starts to go through early divisions, cell divisions, right? And it becomes what's called a blastocyst, a hollow ball of cells, in about a week. And that's when it arrives at the endometrial lining in the uterus. And so here's a picture of the same thing happening that we just saw on the last slide. And here we are. This is my hollow ball of cells, my blastocyst, and it's implanting itself into the endometrium. Now, what happens at about this time is the blastocyst starts to make, the little embryo starts to make its own hormone. It starts secreting something called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. So it's making its own hormone early on. And what that hormone does is it targets the ovary. And it tells the ovary to maintain the corpus luteum. Keep the corpus luteum alive. Keep making estradiol and progesterone. So the little embryo, and that estradiol and progesterone targets the uterus to help maintain the endometrium. Yes. That's what the embryo wants, right? The embryo has just embedded itself in the endometrial lining and is going to start growing there. It needs the endometrium to survive so that it can grow and get nutrition. And what it does is it secretes its own hormone, which allows the endometrium to survive. Pretty cool system, huh? The little fetus just starting to grow, a little embryo just starting to grow, secretes human chorionic gonadotropin that targets the ovary, that to maintain the corpus luteum. The estradiol and the progesterone produced by the corpus luteum targets the uterus to maintain the endometrium. That's 2 thumbs up there, right? Yes, so this is good. the endometrium is maintained. Now, one other thing about HCG. This is the hormone that's identified in the urine of a pregnant woman. So if you take a pregnancy test shortly after missing your period, you can take a pregnancy test and it can test positive maybe a week or two after a missed period. So the embryo is very small at this point in time. What happens is the embryo is starting to make HCG, and a little bit of that is showing up in the urine. And that's what pregnancy test tests for this HCG. Now, what else is going on? All right, the corpus luteum is making progesterone and estradiol, but that progesterone targets the uterus, really, and is involved in the development of the placenta. The placenta, the formation of the placenta is phenomenal. It's a super cool organ. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and we'll come back to this one. This is a picture of a fetus well into development with a placenta in the uterus, right? The placenta is a pretty amazing organ. It develops from the outer row of cells on an embryo. As the embryo implants itself into the endometrium, the outer row of cells start to develop into the placenta. Maternal tissue is also involved in the development of the placenta. So the placenta is this organ that is like partially maternal and partially from the fetus. And what it basically becomes is an organ of exchange. So we get maternal arteries and veins that come in very close contact to the fetal arteries and veins. Actually, the maternal blood just kind of bathes the fetal arteries so that exchanges between the blood happen here. What kind of exchanges? What does the placenta provide? The exchange of gases, so oxygen is provided, carbon dioxide is removed, the removal of waste products, other metabolic waste products, the nutrition. So mom donates nutrition to the embryo so that the embryo can grow. Hormones, antibodies, medicines can go through the placental lining. That's not always so good. Lots and lots of things go through this placenta, allowing for the fetus to grow and thrive. The placenta begins to form about 4 weeks into pregnancy, and it takes until about 18 to 20 weeks into pregnancy to be fully developed. It ends up being about a pound in size, and it's about in weight, and it's about the size of a big dinner plate. If you ever have the chance to see a placenta, do it. Just go for it. Typically this happens when you're giving birth or your partner's giving birth, you can take a look at that placenta. That placenta is what supported your fetus, your baby, through the entire pregnancy, and it's pretty cool to see. Worth looking at. Okay, so now the placenta starts to develop, and as it develops, it makes its own hormones. So let's check out what it's doing. Okay, one of the things it does is it produces more of this HCG that targets the ovaries and tells the ovaries, hey, keep making estradiol, and targets the ovary, telling the ovary, hey, make your estradiol, make your progesterone, keep it coming, maintain the pregnancy. It makes its own progesterone. Progesterone is critical for maintaining a pregnancy. You can see that it's needed for the pregnancy. Some women who have multiple miscarriages early in pregnancy find out that they have low levels of progesterone, and so need to take progesterone shots during the first 12, 13 weeks of pregnancy to help maintain the pregnancy. The placenta also makes human placental lactogen. Human placental lactogen is a hormone that targets the mammary glands. Remember that mammals are going to make their own milk to feed the baby when it's born. And so the human placental lactogen targets the mammary glands and starts their development and maintenance so that you've got the mammary glands ready to go when the pregnancy ends. And when does the pregnancy end? So I'm going to skip over like 40 weeks of development here and move right to birth. So baby has been, our embryo and fetus has been growing in the womb, in the uterus, with the help of the placenta, right? Baby develops, and this development is an amazing process. There are videos that show what's going on during development, well worth your time to watch. So cool, right? But eventually baby's ready to be birthed, and the biggest question is what actually causes labor? And this is a question that's really not fully understood yet. Sometime around 40 weeks after the first day of your the day of your first missed period, labor begins. But that is really quite variable. About 40 weeks, but it can be 37, 38 weeks, 39 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks. At some point, labor begins. And researchers are thinking that there are a few hormones that are important. One of them is the increase in estradiol. Estradiol is being made in the ovaries, and it increases the whole pregnancy, all right? What estradiol does is it activates receptors for another hormone that are found on the uterus. The hormone oxytocin is important in labor as well. So what's happening with oxytocin? Oxytocin is a hormone that's actually made in the brain but released from the posterior pituitary, released from both baby and mother. Posterior pituitary. And what oxytocin does is it causes the uterus to contract, causes contractions in the uterus. It also tells the placenta to make some prostaglandins, which causes more contractions. So the increase in oxytocin can lead to bigger and bigger contractions. Plus, the increase in estradiol makes receptors in the uterus more sensitive to oxytocin, and that's happening toward the end of the pregnancy. Now, watch this. Positive feedback system, something you don't see too much, but there they are. A little bit of oxytocin causes a little bit of contraction, but both of those, but contractions to the uterus stimulate the placenta to make more prostaglandins and stimulate the posterior pituitary to release more oxytocin. So we get this positive feedback loop where small contractions lead to bigger and bigger and bigger contractions. And eventually we get labor, active labor happening. And the 3 stages of active labor include, first, the dilation of the cervix. That cervix, that neck of the uterus, has to open up. Then, after that opens up, there's the expulsion or delivery of the baby, right, of the infant. And finally, the placenta, about 20-30 minutes after baby is delivered, that placenta detaches from the uterus and is removed or is delivered as well. There's a nice picture of a placenta. Amazing organ. Okay. What did I want to say about this? I have no idea. Oh, I think I wanted to ask you this question. If you've ever known someone who's had labor induced, like I need to have my labor induced because I didn't start labor soon enough. Maybe I'm 41 weeks into pregnancy and my doctor says, oh, we need to get labor started. We're going to induce your labor. Or maybe you are inducing labor because you need to have your labor at a certain time, or that's just more convenient, etc. Or what happens if you start labor and it doesn't progress? The doctors may give you something that helps to induce stronger contractions leading to labor. Well, guess what the doctor gives you for all of these cases? A synthetic version of oxytocin called Pitocin, and big doses of it. So being induced means you're basically going to be given a big shot of synthetic oxytocin, which leads to big contractions that leads to the rest of labor. Okay. But once your baby is born and your placenta is removed, there's still more for the reproductive system to handle, right? I'm going to let someone else get that phone call. Who knows what that's for. And there's lactation. All right. What happens next? Well, now mom can feed the baby through lactation, right? Feed the baby milk. Are there hormones involved in this process? You bet. Of course there's hormones involved in this. All right. So the hormones that are going to be involved in lactation are prolactin and oxytocin. Now, how do they work? After baby is born and the placenta is delivered, there is a huge drop in progesterone because the placenta has been providing progesterone, right? Now the placenta's gone. So there's a big drop in progesterone after delivery. That's important because when there's a big drop in progesterone, the anterior pituitary gets acting. Progesterone inhibits the anterior pituitary from making and releasing prolactin. But as soon as the progesterone is gone, as soon as that placenta has been delivered, as soon as the baby's delivered, then the anterior pituitary starts making prolactin and starts pumping out prolactin. What that does is it targets the mammary glands and tells them to start making milk. So they'll start making milk. Maybe they'll start making milk right away, maybe a day after delivery, maybe 2, 3, or 4 days after delivery, that milk production starts in the mammary glands. But then that's great. So whenever the baby is born, maybe the baby is born 8 weeks early, but after the baby is born, prolactin causes the production of milk. So even a baby born 8 weeks early, mom can make milk for, right? And she does. But you need to have something that actually lets the milk out as well. So you've got milk production happening in the mammary glands because of prolactin, but oxytocin is the hormone that helps milk secretion, helps in the letdown response, all right? So oxytocin, we've seen this guy before. We'll talk about that briefly. But oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary, and that causes milk to be let down so that baby can get it. And what triggers the release of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary are things like baby crying, baby suckling. Both of those release the milk so that baby can get the milk. Both of those cause oxytocin to be released. That causes milk letdown. So, a couple of comments here. Oxytocin is kind of an interesting hormone that's been studied by a lot of people. Sometimes it's called the love hormone. Maybe you've heard that before. It's been studied in different animals and in humans, and oxytocin seems to be really important for a number of things. One of them, the release of milk, or the letdown of milk. Another one, contraction causing. Remember, it caused contractions. So as baby is nursing, the milk is being released, and oxytocin levels are causing contractions in mom's uterus. That's actually good. Mom's uterus is big and stretched out, and the oxytocin, especially early in nursing, like, early on in the first couple of weeks of nursing, that and a couple of days even, that uterus has to shrink, and that presence of the oxytocin causes the uterus to shrink back to its normal size, and that's going to prevent too much bleeding from happening. So that's good. The other thing that oxytocin has been known as is the love hormone. It's shown that oxytocin is released by males and females when they're engaged in bonding relationships or bonding in general. So oxytocin seems to be important in stimulating and maintaining bonds between partners or between mom and baby. And so the release of this oxytocin can perhaps help stimulate pair bonding between mom and baby, mom bonding to baby as nursing happens. Fantastic. So that's kind of, I've given you a couple of good reasons to nurse, actually, or to breastfeed. But here's a few more. And breastfeeding is something that is clearly a personal decision. Most of the time, if you see a midwife or go to the hospital, the midwives, the nurses, the doctors will encourage you to try breastfeeding because it has a whole slew of advantages. It doesn't always work for everyone. babies don't latch on, babies are allergic to something that you're eating, babies are not getting enough milk, they're not thriving. It's too hard, it's too painful for mom, or it's very inconvenient. Mom's busy, she's working full time, it's very difficult to nurse. Those are all really good reasons to not nurse. But if you can, doctors and nurses are recommending breastfeeding for 6 months to a year or even more. And here are some of the benefits. You probably know some of them. First of all, it's an ideal nutrition, with protein, fats, and vitamins. And this nutrition changes as the baby gets older. Babies that are born premature, moms make milk that is much fattier and richer for these premature babies than mom's milk made when the baby is born at full term. Crazy, huh? It's easy to digest. Very few babies have trouble with it. Breast milk has antibodies from mom in it, so that can prevent baby illnesses. Babies who are nursed for up to 6 months have a decreased risk of asthma, allergies, ear infections, diarrheal diseases. There's even small evidence to suggest that it increases IQ. It increases bonding to mom. It lowers your risk of obesity or diabetes and your risk of SIDS disease, or sudden infant death syndrome. For mom, nursing or breastfeeding is also useful. Breastfeeding takes a lot of calories, and so what it can do is it can drop pregnancy weight. Pregnancy, you gain weight for the process of nursing. I mean, you need to have enough fat to be able to nurse effectively, and so during nursing, you lose some of that weight. Oxytocin, like I said before, that's released during nursing, stimulates the uterus to contract, which reduces uterine bleeding. There's a lower risk of ovarian cancer if you lactate. This is kind of a more of a controversial one. It reduces money, so you spend less money, but time. That some people say that it's easier, it's quicker to nurse than it is to warm up bottles, to make formula, etc. There's a big debate about that, because sometimes babies nurse really well, sometimes they never nurse well. So that's a big kind of iffier one. In any case, still it might be worth trying to breastfeed sometime in your future life when you have a baby. That's a long way away, I'm sure. But if you and when you do, think about it and think about some of the benefits. But don't feel terrible if you can't or if you decide not to. That's just we have formula and it's fantastic too. Okay, so then the rest of the chapter focuses on contraception and reproductive technologies. We've already talked about most of the contraception. I think we've covered these. You guys can probably figure that out. Tubal ligation, that's when a woman's tubes or oviducts are cut so that eggs can't meet up with sperm ever again. It's a permanent form of birth control, just like a vasectomy is. There's a section on assisted reproductive technologies like in vitro fertilization, but you don't have to cover that material. And there's a picture of my triplets all grown up. They are now freshmen in college, and we made it through those rough first 2 or 3 years. And that's it. That's the end of this chapter. The concept checks are really good. The test your understanding questions are really good. I'll be posting a quiz, an online quiz that covers chapters 46 and 47. We're not going to cover much of chapter 47, but that's where we are. So I think I'm done for today with chapter 46. Let's see if we can get out of here and say goodbye to you all, and we'll talk to you, or we'll see you for one more video at least over chapter 47. Thanks, bye.